Engineers laughed at this tank, until it took 14 direct hits. The problem wasn't the men. It was the metal. By the brutal winter of 1944, the American tank crews fighting their way toward Germany knew it in their bones. A cold, lout, hard truth that lived in the pit of their stomachs every time they rolled out of the tree line. They called their M4 Sherman tank the Tommy Cooker. The Germans, with a darker, more clinical precision, called it the Ronson, after the lighter whose slogan promised it lit first time, every time. Because when a German 75 mm or 88 mm shell punched through the Sherman's armor, and it almost always did, the stored ammunition in the hull would ignite, creating a flash fire that could turn 33 tons of American steel into a coffin in under 9 seconds. Crews knew the drill. If you got hit, you had to get out before the brew up. You didn't count the seconds. You felt the heat. In the frozen forests of the Ardennes during the Battle of the Bulge, that heat was the only warmth many of them ever felt again. Back in the States, the men who designed the machines read the reports. They saw the casualty figures, the ratios of loss, lout. A Sherman needed to get within suicidal range of a German Panther to have a hope of penetrating its sloped frontal armor. The Panther could kill a Sherman from over a mile away. The math was simple, and it was written in blood. Yet, out in the hallways of power at the Army Ground Forces Command, a different kind of logic prevailed. It was the logic of accountants, of production line managers, of men who believed war was a problem of industry, out, not of individual survival. Their champion was Lieutenant General Leslie McNair, a brilliant organizer who believed in the doctrine of the tank destroyer. Tanks, in his view, were for exploiting breakthroughs and supporting infantry. Specialist, fast-moving tank destroyers would handle enemy armor. The Sherman, he insisted, was adequate. It was reliable, it was easy to produce in staggering numbers, lout, and it had worked in the open deserts of North Africa, out. The fact that it was now burning in the hedgerows of Normandy and the snowdrifts of Belgium was, to men like McNair, out. Not a failure of design, but a failure of tactics. To the men crouched inside them, breathing in the smell of oil, cordite, and their own fear, it was a death sentence. They weren't fighting a doctrine. They were fighting a panther. And they were losing. But in a drafting room at the Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland, a group of engineers and soldiers who had seen the reports and who had listened to the screams of burned crews were working on an answer. They called it the T-26. It was everything the Sherman wasn't. Where the Sherman had a 75 mm gun, the T-26 had a monstrous 90 mm high-velocity cannon, a weapon that could look a panther in the eye. Where the Sherman had barely 3 inches of frontal armor, the T-26 had over 4, with better sloping. It was heavier, wider, more powerful. It was, they believed, what the boys at the front desperately needed, out. And General McNair's staff hated it. They laughed at it. They called it a white elephant, a waste of scarce resources. Every time the T-26 team added armor or improved the suspension to handle the weight, out, the objections grew louder. The tank was too heavy for European bridges, they argued. It was too wide for transport ships. Its complicated torsion bar suspension would break down in the field. It guzzled too much fuel. The war was a battle of production, lout, and the Sherman rolled off the assembly line at the Cadillac plant in Detroit like clockwork. The T-26 was a boutique project, an engineer's fantasy. The bureaucracy stalled it, redesigned it, and stalled it again. For 3 years, As the Sherman burned from Tunisia to the Rhine, the T-26 program crawled forward. Men died waiting for it out. The laughter of the engineers in Washington was a sound they never heard. But its consequence was the last thing they ever felt. That laughter stopped on a gray December morning in 1944, when over 400 German Panthers and King Tigers smashed through the thin American lines in the Ardennes. The bulge was the ultimate test of McNair's doctrine, and the doctrine failed catastrophically. American tank destroyers, thin, skinned, and exposed, were annihilated. Sherman battalions were shattered, whole companies wiped out in minutes. The stories that filtered back were horrifying of Sherman's firing round after round at the frontal armor of a Tiger out, watching them spark and ricochet harmlessly, while a single returning 88 mm shell would tear through two. Sometimes 3 Shermans in a line. The battlefield reality was a brutal referendum, and the Sherman had lost. The political will that had stalled the T-26 for years evaporated overnight. In January 1945, an urgent order was signed. The first 20 of these new tanks, now officially designated the M26 Pershing, were to be rushed to Europe. They were loaded onto fast transports, not as part of a broad deployment, but as a desperate experiment. They were to be thrown into the fight against the best the Germans had, a final, feverish test to see if American engineering could, at the 11th hour, save American lives. Among those first 20 Pershings was a tank with the serial number 26 out. Its crew was a band of veterans from the 3rd Armored Division, and men who had survived the hedgerows and the bulge by a mixture of skill and sheer dumb luck. Their commander was Staff Sergeant Robert Early, a quiet Texan with old eyes. The gunner was Corporal Clarence Smoyer, loud, 21-year-old from the coal country of Pennsylvania, who had never been in a fight before the war and who still dreamed of the one rabbit he'd shot as a boy and felt sick afterward. They'd been a crew since Normandy, dancing with death in their Tommy Cooker. When they were assigned to the Pershing out, they didn't see a savior. They saw a strange, foreign machine. It was lower and meaner, looking than the Sherman, with a long, overhanging gun. The controls were similar, but everything felt heavier, more deliberate. They were given a crash course. They learned the new firing sequence for the 90 mm, a round so heavy it took both hands to load. They fired a few practice shots. The blast was volcanic, the recoil a physical jolt that ran through the entire hull. It was nothing like the pop gun report of the Sherman's 75 1M. This was the sound of authority. Their new tank was given a name. In a moment of homesick defiance, they painted EAGL E7 on its barrel out, after the Philadelphia Eagles. It was a piece of home, a token of normalcy welded to a machine built for a single purpose out, to kill the killers. They joined the push into Germany, this odd, solitary beast moving alongside the familiar Shermans out. For weeks, they saw little action. The Pershing was a secret weapon, to be used sparingly. The crew began to wonder if it was all just another experiment out, if they'd simply traded one kind of vulnerability for another. That question was answered on the morning of March 6, 1945, out, as Eagle 7 nosed its way into the shattered, epic ruin of Cologne. The city was a corpse. Cologne, Germany's 4th largest city, a centuries-old hub of culture and commerce on the Rhine, had been methodically dismantled by 262 Allied bombing raids. What remained wasn't architecture, but geology out. Canyons of jagged brick, mountains of pulverized stone. A landscape of such profound ruin that the twin spires of the medieval cathedral, still standing impossibly tall amidst the devastation, felt less like a testament to faith and more like a pair of grave markers for an entire civilization. The air stank of wet ash, powdered concrete, and the sour, metallic scent of death that no spring rain could wash away. This was the battlefield, not fields or forests, but a claustrophobic, three-dimensional maze where death could come from a window, a sewer grate, or a pile of rubble that concealed an 88mm gun. It was terrain that neutralized the advantages of any tank. Speed was useless in streets choked with debris. Armor was meaningless against a Panzerfaust fired from a second-story bathroom. Every intersection was a potential ambush. Every hollow-eyed window a sniper's nest. Eagle 7 moved through this gray hellscape with a low, grinding growl, its wide tracks crushing bricks and splintered wood. The crew was silent, locked in the familiar, tense ritual of urban combat. Private William McFeevey, the driver, peered through his periscope. His world reduced to a narrow slice of ruined street, navigating around shell craters and the skeletons of streetcars. In the bow, Private Homer Davis swiveled his machine gun, scanning the ominous, dark openings of basement windows. In the turret, the atmosphere was thick with concentration. Loader John DeRiggy stood ready, his hands resting on the next 90 WM round. Sergeant Early, his helmet pressed against the rubber eyepiece of his vision block, scanned for movement, for the telltale shape of a gun barrel. And Clarence Smoyer, his right eye pressed to the telescopic sight of the main gun, breathed slowly, his hand on the traverse control. The crosshairs drifted across broken facades. He was looking for a shape that didn't belong, for a straight line in a world of chaos. He was hunting. They had been ordered to spearhead the advance toward the cathedral square, the strategic heart of the city. It was a dubious honor. The first tank into the unknown was the first target. The radio crackled with disjointed updates. Other units were engaged in vicious room-to-room fighting. German defenders, a mix of desperate Wehrmacht regulars and fanatical Hitler youth, were using the city's subterranean network of cellars and pedestrian tunnels, dubbed mouse holes by the Americans, to appear behind Allied lines, inflict casualties, and vanish. The battle was a disjointed, surreal nightmare. But resistance in their immediate path seemed light. Too light. It felt less like an advance and more like being led into a clearing. At 0947, the silence was ripped apart by the sound they'd all been waiting for and dreading. It came from somewhere ahead, near the cathedral. Too quick. Thunderous booms, the unmistakable flat crack of a high-velocity tank gun. A heartbeat of silence, then a third. Then, a different sound, a metallic shriek, like a giant being punched in the chest. It was the sound of armor being penetrated. The radio exploded into frantic, clipped transmissions. F Company Sherman hit. Crew bailing? Second Sherman engaged! It's a Panther! Panther in the cathedral square! The voice was tight, controlled, but underpinned with panic. A Panther. The very beast the Pershing was built to kill. Sergeant Early's voice came through the intercom, calm as a Sunday morning. You hear that, boys? That's our dance partner. McVeigh eased Eagle 7 to a halt behind the relative cover of a collapsed apartment block. They were 1 block from the square. They could feel the immensity of the cathedral just beyond the ruins, a brooding, Gothic presence. Early made a decision. He needed eyes. Leaving the safety of 46 tons of steel was madness. but driving blind into a prepared German gunner's sight was suicide. He popped the commander's hatch and slid out into the cold, ash-flecked air. The scene was apocalyptic. He moved low and fast along a shattered wall, his boots crunching on glass. Ahead, he saw an American soldier in a dusty uniform, not hiding, but standing with a small movie camera perched on his shoulder. It was Technical Sergeant Jim Bates of the Army Signal Corps, a one-man newsreel. Bates had filmed the whole thing. He pointed a gloved finger. "It's right there, Sarge. In the side street north of the cathedral. Got the Shermans as they came in. Clean shots." Early peered around the corner. The square was a vast, open plain of rubble. And there, partially sheltered in the lee of a shattered commercial building, was the Panther. It was perfectly positioned, covering the main northern approach. Its long, overhanging 70-feet Bumbry gun was still smoking. 200 yards away, the lead Sherman was burning, a thick column of black smoke coiling into the sky. The second Sherman was visible as a dark hulk further away, motionless. The Panther looked invincible. A predator in its lair, having just made its kill. Early's mind, trained by a year of survival, began calculating angles. A frontal charge across the square was a duel, a 50-50 proposition at best. But he saw another route. A side street ran parallel to their position, looping west. If they could take that street out, they could emerge from the Panther's flank. The German tank's turret was facing north, toward its recent kills. It would have to traverse nearly 90 degrees to face a threat from the west. In tank combat, seconds were eternity. Those seconds were the only advantage they needed. He scurried back to Eagle 7 and laid out the plan. They would take the side street, turn hard into the square, and Smoyer would have a clear shot at the Panther's thinner side armor before its crew could fully react. It was simple. In the simplicity was immense risk. Everything depended on timing, on surprise, on one shot. Smoyer listened, nodded, and said nothing. His mouth was dust-dry. He rotated the heavy turret manually until the long 90mm tube pointed over the right side of the hull, aiming at the empty space where, in a few moments, he prayed the Panther would be. Eagle 7's engine roared as McVeigh threw it into gear. The tank lurched forward, turning into the narrow side street. The world, through the periscopes and sights, narrowed to a tunnel. Bricks scraped against the fenders. The noise of the engine and grinding treads echoed off the walls, a deafening announcement of their approach. There was no stealth now, only speed. Smoyer kept his eye glued to the sight. His body braced against the coming collision of violence. DeRiggy held an armor, piercing round against his chest, a 50-pound lump of cold steel that carried all their hopes. The intersection with the square rushed toward them. They could see the open sky ahead. McVeigh's voice, tense, came through the headset. Approaching the turn, hold on. The bow of the Pershing broke into the open square. And there it was. 110 yards away, the Panther. It was already moving. Someone in the German tank had heard them, had understood the threat. The long barrel was already beginning its slow, terrifying swing toward them. It was a race of hydraulics and human nerves. McVeigh didn't stop. Stopping was death. He did the opposite. He slammed the throttle forward. The Pershing surged ahead, crossing the Panther's line of fire. For a horrific second, Smoyer was staring directly down the dark, yawning muzzle of the German 75 WWII. He saw the details, the muzzle brake, the chipped paint. His brain screamed. His training took over. He didn't wait for a perfect, stationary shot. He led the moving target of his own tank, his hand a rock on the controls. At 09:59 and 12 seconds, in the shadow of the Cologne Cathedral, Corporal Clarence Smoyer pulled the trigger. The world inside Eagle 7 dissolved into sound and fury. The blast of the 90mm gun was a physical concussion out. A giant's fist slamming into the hull. The flash from the muzzle was blinding even through the optics out. The spent casing clanged shrilly in the metal turret basket, instantly filling the space with the acrid, unforgettable smell of cordite. For a fraction of a second, time seemed to suspend. Then, through his sight, Smoyer saw the result. A flash of orange sparks, brilliant as a welder's torch, erupted on the Panther's turret face. Just below the gun mantlet, a direct hit. But the German tank didn't explode. It didn't brew up. It just sat there. The round had struck the thickest part of its frontal armor. It was a solid hit, a proof of the 90mm's power. But not a kill, again! Load. Early's voice was sharp in the intercom. DeRiggi was already moving out. A symphony of muscle memory. The heavy breech block flew open, the smoking casing ejected, and a fresh armor-piercing round was rammed home in one fluid motion out. The clunk of the breech locking was the most reassuring sound Smoyer had ever heard. The Panther's turret was still moving, still trying to complete its traverse. It was an agonizingly slow mechanical process out. Those few seconds were the gift McVeigh's bold move had bought them. Smoyer didn't aim for the front this time out. He nudged the controls, the electric motor of the turret whining, and settled his crosshairs lower, on the Panther's flank out, on the flat vertical plate of its whole side armor. He fired. The second shot struck with a different sound, a deeper, more final crunch. This time, there was no spray of sparks. The 90mm projectile, engineered to slice through steel, punched through the Panther's side like a fist through plaster. It didn't stop. It exited out the other side, leaving two perfect, gaping holes. Inside the German tank, the world ended out. The tungsten core of the round became a swirling blender of shrapnel, ricocheting in the confined space out, tearing through hydraulic lines, equipment, and flesh. A millisecond after penetration, secondary explosions began as stored ammunition, touched by the superheated fragments, started to cook off. Smoyer out, operating on pure instinct now, fired a third time. The round hit the turret ring. By the time this impact registered out, flames were already licking from the hatches of the Panther. The hatch on the commander's cupola flew open. A figure, wreathed in smoke, clawed his way out and tumbled to the cobblestones. Another followed. Then another. They scrambled away from the dying beast, not looking back, their war over. One man did not emerge out. The fire took hold with terrifying speed, fueled by gasoline and oil. Within a minute, the Panther was a roaring pyre out. A pillar of black and orange flame reaching into the gray Cologne sky. Its ammunition popping and cracking inside like lethal fireworks. The duel had lasted 45 seconds out. On the second floor of a ruined department store, Jim Bates kept his camera rolling, capturing every frame. He had the money shot. The climactic moment the War Department back home craved the new American wonder. Weapon out. The tank the bureaucrats said wasn't needed, decisively destroying the symbol of German armored superiority. It was a propaganda film made in hell. Inside Eagle 7, there was no cheering. There was a deafening silence, broken only by the hiss of the ventilation and the distant crackle of the burning Panther out. The crew sat in a shared state of shock, their ears ringing, the adrenaline crashing in waves. They had done it. They had survived. Smoyer unclenched his hands from the controls. They were trembling violently. He looked at them as if they belonged to someone else. The immediate aftermath was anticlimactic. With the Panther destroyed, German resistance in the cathedral square collapsed. American infantry moved in. Engineers began the dangerous work of clearing the Hohenzollern Bridge of demolition charges. Eagle 7, now a celebrated hero, was ordered to continue pressing east, clearing remaining pockets of resistance. The crew's elation, a brittle, nervous thing, was short-lived. War has a way of resetting the stakes instantly. Just blocks from the cathedral, Eagle 7 entered a narrower street, a canyon of broken masonry where the buildings leaned in as if to listen. The tension returned, thicker than before. The triumph over the Panther felt distant, almost like a story they'd heard about someone else. Then, movement. A black sedan, a German Opel Kapitten, suddenly shot out from a side street, speeding across the intersection ahead. It was utterly out of place. A ghost of peacetime racing through the apocalypse. In the high-strung, kill or be killed logic of urban combat, anything that moved was a threat. Civilians were supposed to be gone. This was a car for officers, for messengers. Without conscious thought, reacting to the perceived danger, Smoyer's hand swung the coaxial machine gun, the one mounted next to the main cannon for engaging infantry, and he depressed the trigger. A short, sharp burst. Tracers streaked across the intersection, sparking off the cobblestones and punching into the car's bodywork. Glass shattered. At the exact same moment, from a concealed position to their left, hidden behind a pile of rubble, a hidden German Panzer IV opened up with its own machine gun. Its crew had seen the same car, drawn the same conclusion. The combined hail of fire from both American and German guns raked the vehicle. It swerved violently, slammed into a pile of bricks, and stopped. The driver's head slumped against the window. The passenger door swung open. A figure, small and dark, clothed, tumbled out onto the street and lay perfectly still. A coldness, deeper than any winter in the Ardennes, seized Clarence Smoyer. He stared at the motionless form. He hadn't even seen who was in the car. He had seen a shape, a movement, a threat. Now he saw a person. And he knew, with a certainty that bypassed thought and went straight to the soul, that he had just done something that no amount of heroics against a Panther could ever undo. Before he could process it, the hidden Panzer IV revealed itself fully, its short 70 Ballerie gun now seeking the bigger threat, the American heavy tank. The German commander, perhaps hoping to capitalize on the distraction, had decided to fight. The turret began to traverse toward Eagle 7. Sergeant Early's command was instant. "Gunner! Target!" Tank? 1 o'clock. The Panzer IV was an older model, no match for a Pershing in a straight fight, but it had the advantage of cover and the first shot. Smoyer, his mind reeling, his body moving on pure, trained autopilot, wrenched his sight away from the car and onto the German tank. But he couldn't get a clean shot out. The Panzer IV was nestled behind the collapsed front of a 4-story building. Only its gun and part of its turret were visible. A hit there might not kill it. The German gun fired out. The shell screamed past Eagle 7's turret, missing by inches and detonating against the wall behind them with a deafening boom. Showering the Pershing in bricks and dust, they had to move. They had to kill it now. Smoyer's eyes darted from the partially hidden tank to the structure sheltering it. The building was a skeleton, but its front torn off, but its side walls and internal floors still precariously standing. An idea, desperate and terrible, formed. He didn't aim at the tank. He elevated the gun slightly, centering the crosshairs on the load, bearing corner of the building that remained standing, right where it met the rubble.
"Switching to A!"
Durigi yelled, slamming a high, explosive round into the breech. Smoyer fired. The high, explosive shell was designed for this, for demolishing walls, for cracking bunkers. It struck the masonry with a different kind of thunder, a blooming orange fireball of pulverized brick and concrete. For a suspended moment, nothing happened. Then, with a deep, groaning rumble that they felt in their teeth out, the entire section of the building gave way. 4 stories of ancient German stone and timber collapsed in on itself. A slow motion avalanche of ruin directly onto the position of the Panzer IV. The dust cloud that billowed out was colossal. A gray tidal wave that engulfed the street, blotting out the sun. When it finally began to settle, the building was a shapeless mound. The Panzer IV was nowhere to be seen, buried under tons of debris. The street was silent again, save for the settling trickle of stone. The threat was eliminated. Smoyer had saved his crew. He looked back toward the intersection, but the dust was too thick. The black car, and what lay beside it, was hidden from view. He would carry that obscuring cloud in his mind for the next 68 years. The war, for Clarence Smoyer, ended on paper in September 1945 at Fort Dix, New Jersey. He received his discharge papers, a train ticket home, and a uniform in a duffel bag. The army was done with him. He was 21 years old, a veteran of the most mechanized war in history, and he felt 1,000. He returned to the green, rolling hills of Pennsylvania, to the town of Laheyton, where the air smelled of earth and leaves, not cordite and corpses. His parents welcomed home the quiet boy who had left. They saw the Bronze Star the stories in the local paper about the hero of Cologne. They did not see the other man who had come back with him, the one who lived just behind his eyes. He found work at a cement plant. The work was hard, physical, monotonous. He liked that. It left little room for thought. He married a kind woman named Melba. They had children. He built a life. A good, honest, American life. He never spoke of the war. Not of the Panther, not of the Triumph. And especially not of the black car in the intersection. When his son, Barry, asked about the big gun, Smoyer would just shake his head and say, "That was a long time ago." But the war wasn't done with him. It visited every night. In his dreams, he was always back in the turret. But in the dreams, the gun wouldn't fire. The traverse motor would whine helplessly. And he would watch, frozen as the Panther's gun turned toward him. Infinitely slowly, or he would see the black car speeding loud. And he would pull the trigger, but no bullets would come out. Or they would, and the figure would fall. And it was always a woman, and she would look right at him. He would wake up swinging, his heart hammering against his ribs, the sheets soaked with sweat. Melba learned to recognize the signs, to soothe him without asking questions. The memories were a separate reality, more vivid than his waking life. The cement dust on his hands felt less real than the grip of the gun controls. Decades stacked upon decades. The world moved on. The Pershing was itself made obsolete by newer tanks. The Cold War rose and fell. Smoyer's hair turned gray, then white. His children grew. His son Barry, troubled in ways a father who had survived a war could never understand, died of an overdose. The loss was a different kind of shell blast, one that left no visible crater, but hollowed him out nonetheless. Then Melba began to forget. First names, then faces, then him. Alzheimer's disease slowly, cruelly, dismantled the woman who had been his anchor to the present. She passed away in 2017. Clarence Smoyer, now in his 90s, was alone. The people of his peace were gone. The people of his war, Early, McVeigh, DeRiggy, Davis, were long dead. Only the war remained. It was his most faithful companion, and his torturer. The catalyst for his final mission came not from a general, but from a television. In 1996, a documentary on the History Channel about the 3rd Armored Division aired. There, in grainy black and white, was Jim Bates's footage. Smoyer watched, his breath shallow, as Eagle 7 charged into the square. He saw his younger self, a ghost in a machine, fire the shots that killed the Panther. He felt a numb detachment. Then, the footage continued. Bates had kept filming. The camera panned across the square, past the burning Panther, and settled for just a few frames on a side street. There was the black opal. There was the clear, unmistakable image of a young woman's body lying on the cobblestones, her dark dress pooled around her. The film confirmed the nightmare. It was not a phantom. It was history. Her name was Katharina Ezer. She was 26 years old. She had stayed in Cologne to care for her aging parents while her sisters fled. On that morning, with the Americans advancing, she and her employer had made a desperate, last-minute dash across the city. Hoping to find shelter, she was a clerk. She took night classes in home economics. She had never fired a gun. She had been caught in the crossfire of 2 armies, and in the crossfire of 2 consciences. Stricken gunners, Clarence Smoyer and an 18th-year-old German tanker named Gustav Schaefer, who had been manning the machine gun in the buried Panzer IV. A German journalist, researching the human stories of Cologne's fall, pieced it all together. He found Smoyer in a retirement home in Allentown. He told him he had found Katharina's grave, and more astonishingly, he had found Gustav Schaefer. Alive and living outside Hamburg, Schaefer had carried the same guilt, the same exact image burned into his mind, for the same 68 years. He believed his bullets had killed her. In 2013, the journalist arranged a meeting. At the steps of Cologne Cathedral, the very spires that had loomed over their duel, 2 old men approached each other. One was an American hero. The other was a former enemy. They were both just old men now, bent by time, haunted by the same ghost. Smoyer extended a trembling hand. Schaefer took it. They did not speak of tactics or tanks. They spoke of her. They walked together to the Arif Westfriedhof Cemetery, to a communal grave for the civilians killed in the final battle for the city. The stone was simple. They placed a bouquet of yellow roses upon it. As Smoyer leaned down, his legs, 90 years old and weary, buckled. Schaefer, the man he had tried to kill, reached out and caught him, holding him upright. 2 old soldiers, holding each other up at the grave of the woman they both feared they had killed. The moment was beyond forgiveness. It was a shared burden, finally shouldered together. They became friends. They wrote letters. They spoke on video calls. 2 elderly men in cardigans discussing gardening, grandchildren, and the unshakable past. They found a fragile, hard-won peace in shared responsibility. Gustav Schaefer died in 2017. Smoyer sent flowers to the funeral. The note read, "I will never forget you. Your brother-in-arms, Clarence. On September 18, 2019, at the age of 95, Laut." Clarence Smoyer was awarded the Bronze Star for his actions at Cologne, out, a formal recognition that had been lost in the paperwork of war. He was the last surviving member of Eagle 7's crew, Laut. He accepted it not for killing a panther, but for the memory of the crew, and for the man he had become after. Clarence Smoyer died on September 30th, 2022. He was 99. The official obituaries spoke of a hero, a tank gunner, a recipient of the Bronze Star. The truer story was of a coal miner's son who never wanted to fight, out, who became lethally good at it, Laut, and who spent a lifetime measuring the distance between a necessary kill and a tragic accident, between valor and regret, out. He understood in a way the engineers and the generals who laughed at his tank never could. That armor isn't measured in inches of steel, but in the resilience of the human heart to carry the weight of what it must do to survive. And so, the story asks us, what was the Pershing's real armor? Was it the 4 inches of hardened steel that withstood the Panzer IV's frantic shot? Or was it the 68 years of quiet endurance it took for the man inside to finally make peace with the war? The Panther still burns in the old photographs. Eagle 7 sits silently in the National Armor and Cavalry Museum in Fort Benning, Georgia, a relic behind a velvet rope. But the real legacy of that tank, of that duel, of that whole terrible and magnificent war, isn't in museums or history books. It's in the quiet, stubborn, heartbreaking choice to remember, to seek out a grave, to place yellow roses, to reach out a hand to a former enemy, and to say, without words, "I remember her, too." That is the armor that lasts. That is the armor that truly takes a direct hit, and somehow, impossibly, holds.